Hello everyone. I'm not sure I need this, but I'm going to use the microphone because we're going to be recording this session. So welcome everyone. I'm Kristen Daly, the Executive Director of Global Washington, your host for today. And thank you for coming out on such a lovely day. I feel like everyone took a leisurely stroll in the sunshine. Everyone was here early, so we'll get you out on time too, so you can enjoy the beautiful evening. For those of you that don't know, Global Washington is a network of 167 organizations, mostly nonprofits, but also for-profits, academic institutions, and foundations that all have a presence in Washington State and are doing work to improve lives in developing countries. So the speakers you'll hear today are Global Washington members, and we're very proud of the work that they do. With 167 organizations, we have people that do things from climate change to global health to economic development. So the way we organize our work is we do a deep dive into an issue, one per month. So this month we've decided to do maternal health, and it is an echo and because of the Women Deliver conference that's happening in a couple weeks in Vancouver, BC. And in looking at the conference at Women Deliver, we noticed that it really does have a gender equity lens this year, and really looking at different issues there. And in talking with our members, especially Heidi from Pronto, really talked about where there is some inequalities and some issues that our members are working on around equity and maternal health. And it came up that birth attendants are some of the people in childbirth who are most discriminated against, and the issues around that are very complex. So we decided to dive into that. So that's what today is about. We have a full month campaign around this. So you'll see you have an issue brief here. That's part of it. We've also done profiles of individuals, of Heidi and others, and a organizational profile that you can find on our website. We would welcome you to find out more about Global Washington. Again, we do different issues each month, and then they all roll up into our annual conference, which is on December 5th this year. Here in Seattle, it has about 450 people each year, and we're really looking at complex issues, what we call wicked problems, that need a comprehensive solution, and even to the extent where one solution might have an unintended consequence, that other solutions need to come in behind it. So it should be a really fascinating conference. You're all welcome to attend. Also wanted to thank our co-promoters for this event today, the Washington Global Health Alliance. They're our kind of sister organization and our partner on many events throughout the year. So wanted to thank them as well. So before we get started, we have a special treat for you all. We decided this event really is meant to support birth attendants in developing countries, and thus we don't have those birth attendants here with us, right? They are in developing countries doing the work that we are all trying to support. However, we do have a fantastic midwife who's here with us today, who's a midwife here in Seattle, and I was just telling her I had a midwife with both my children, and it was the most wonderful experience ever, and I have such respect for midwives all over the world. So to get us into the mindset and the context for our conversation, Jenny Rose Wilson is going to be reading an excerpt from you can explain a little more from kind of a presentation that Pronto's been working on. So Jenny.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm a midwife with Neighbor Care Health here in Seattle, and I'm honored to take care of primarily refugee and immigrant women from all over the world. About half of my particular panel is Somali, so it's very special to get a glimpse into a lot of these international issues from my perspective. But I'm honored to be presenting a sneak peek into this new performance called Midwife Monologues that's designed by PRONTO International and also their data science and theater colleagues at Fieldworks Creations. So this performance has actually been constructed using language from interviews from midwives from Kenya, Uganda, India, and Timor. And Susan Thompson and I were speaking earlier about a midwife named Rara, who is a midwife in Timor, who actually, some of the words you're going to hear are from her specifically. But Pronto believes so much in the providers that support that they've invested in developing this performance as another path, not just for data dissemination, but also understanding the powerful maternal health work that's done mostly by women, for women on the front lines. And I just want to say for myself personally, it's been a tough week in our practice. We've had some outcomes that have been hard to process and hard to deal with. And so these words feel really close to home for me, specifically today. So it's an honor to just be part of the company of midwives around the world who are, I love this quote that's listed here. One midwife in Migori, Kenya said, "A bar chart cannot capture the ecstasy and the anguish of my profession." So here are two of the midwife monologues. The first one is entitled, "She Had Come Here for Help." A few weeks ago, I was mentoring at a referral hospital in a small city. I came in the morning and found a student delivering a mother. She was delivering the second twin. And I see blood. I say to her, "That's a lot of blood." And then I see a nurse and say, "Hey, do you see that bleeding? That bleeding is a lot." And he says, "Okay, let me put on some gloves." I had to get to my training in the next ward. So to the nurse I say, "Call someone if you need help." I felt a little uncomfortable, but I was late to my training. So I asked him, "Do you want me to put on gloves?" And he said, no, I'm already gloved. So I say, "Okay," and I leave for my training. In the middle of lecturing, I hear voices shouting for other nurses. Come, come. I see the nurse again running past the room, and I think, no, this is not right. So I say, "Okay, what is it? Could it be that patient from this morning?" I took my students and went to the maternity ward and found the mother in a pool of blood. We ran. We gave her IV fluids, but she was almost in shock. We took vital signs, but by that time they could not even be heard. We had to rush the mother to the operating theater, but by the time the doctor got there, we had lost her. Just like that. It was the most painful death. This is a referral facility. This patient was referred from a peripheral facility. She had come here for help, and now she's gone. It was pathetic. I was so angry. I went home and I couldn't sleep. If only I could have gloved. If only I had not trusted that nurse who told me it was okay. If only I could have done something else. I was a mentor. This mother should not have died. Thank you. And here's another midwife story entitled "Night Shift Beyond the Sky." The number of deliveries per night. Oof. One night, maybe we deliver 11 or 12 clients, 7 at a minimum, 5 on a really good shift. It's amazing that most of these emergencies tend to come up at night, when the capacity is limited in terms of human workforce, limited in terms of the supplies you need, and limited in terms of structure. And desperate moments call for desperate measures. There are a lot of memories that will always linger. There's this day I was in the maternity unit as the night shift nurse. A mother comes in from the local community. She was a gravid at 2. For our setup, the first thing we do is triage the client. We do a brief history, look at her antenatal care book, the number of visits she's attended, and the profiling just to see if there's anything alarming. For this mother, there was nothing significant. So I went ahead and took her vitals. I remember it vividly. This was 2014. I took her blood pressure and it was 200/90. She told me she felt the urge to push, so there was no time to act. I rushed her to the delivery room, placed her on the bed. I call my assistant, I glove, prepare, and confirm that the mother was approaching second stage. I could feel the head crowning when suddenly the mother started seizing on me. Eclampsia. I screamed for my assistant to come and take over and ran to get magnesium sulfate and hydralazine from the pharmacy. I came back and pushed the medications and waited. The convulsions subsided. The mother pushed the baby out in one push. The baby had a good score, so we placed her on the warmer and then went back to attend the mother. Her blood pressure was still beyond the sky. I let my assistant deliver the placenta and called the doctor on call. He was a ways away, so I sent an ambulance to get him. When I returned to the room, there was blood everywhere, and my assistant was in a panic. Oh my good Lord, 2 in 1, and it's at night. I was the only trained clinician in that hospital, and I was in a catch-22. With eclampsia, we're supposed to restrict fluid intake, but with a postpartum hemorrhage, fluids are indicated. It was a critical situation. I looked at the blood pouring out of the mother and made the decision to hang the fluid. I examined her and found she had an atonic uterus. It wouldn't contract, which it turned out was due to products of conception, part of the placenta left inside her uterus after the birth. Remember, I had to delegate to my assistant while I called the doctor, and she was unable to remove all the products. I got them out, gave her fluids, uterotonics, and a blood transfusion. She survived. But oh my good Lord. Sometimes things happen that you have no control over. You're working in facilities where, how can I say it, where you don't have everything you need to take care of these women. Like the necessary staffing and the supplies and the medications close at hand. It's so challenging. The facility is not adequate for you to give wholesome care to this woman. That moment and that case really took a toll on me. Thank you.
Wow.
Wow, thank you. And thank you for the heartfelt reading of that. I will make sure to attend the full thing at Women's Delivery next week. That's compelling. So I'm Kirsten Gagne, and I'm the CEO of Kati Collective. Kati is a Swahili word that means in the center or in the middle of. And I started my company with the deep belief that we need to put the women that we are serving in the center of all that we do with global development, all of the ways that we think and all of the decisions that we make. Our main areas of focus are around serving women and serving them using digital tools with a human lens and using sustainable, impactful partnerships to serve them in better ways. I've also spent much of my career focused on maternal, newborn, and child health, and have spent a significant amount of time on the ground in Africa, India, and Bangladesh with women understanding their needs at this critical point in their lives. So thank you to Kristen and to Global Washington for inviting me to moderate this very important discussion today. So first I'll start with some good news. Between 1990 and 2015, maternity mortality worldwide dropped by about 44%. However, as most of us in this room are well aware of today's statistics, there still are about 830 women every day around the world who die from preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth. And 99% of all maternal deaths occur in developing countries. However, the United States is also not immune to this. Our maternal mortality rates are on the rise, and this is in part due to women not receiving the appropriate prenatal care. Women who don't receive this care are 3 to 4 times more likely to have a pregnancy-related death. And additionally, as we can all intuit, and as research from ICRW has shown, when a woman dies from pregnancy or childbirth-related causes, her illness and death begins a chain of loss that harms her children's health, education, their future opportunities. It deepens the household poverty, disrupts the life of her family, and devastates her loved ones with grief. The economic and human costs of maternal death are truly too high a price to bear. And it's clear that saving a mother's life during or immediately after childbirth is critical to ensuring stable families, communities, and societies. But there's so much more work to do. Sustainable Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being, seeks to reduce the global maternal mortality figure by 68% by 2030. But that goal will not be achieved without the support of exponentially more and better trained skilled birth attendants. For many women, as we heard during the piece that Jenny just did for us a few moments ago, barriers such as long distances to get to poorly stocked and staffed clinics, cultural and religious beliefs, and a lack of just basic information make it very difficult for them to access care. And once a woman does seek care, the systems and resources required to ensure a safe birth, like affordable, reliable, timely transportation, safe blood to transfuse, and even clean water, basic supplies, and power are often weak links to ensure a safe delivery. But even when some of these elements are lacking, perhaps the most important part of a safe delivery is access to skilled birth attendants. These birth attendants may be aunties, village elders, frontline health workers, midwives, and very, very rarely are doctors. But birth attendants, especially midwives and healthcare workers, are often the most poorly paid of medical staff around the world. They face issues of living in poverty themselves, and they lack access to the most basic training and resources to do their jobs. So it's my honor to be able to moderate this conversation with some of the women who have been working for decades to tackle this tough issue. They truly are global greats who are also our Northwest friends and neighbors. So their bios are provided in the handouts that you've received. So I'll just do brief introductions and then we can dive into the conversation. So first, I've got Heidi Breeze-Harris, who's the Executive Director of PRONTO International. PRONTO aims to optimize healthcare during birth. They develop and implement innovative training strategies to act as a catalyst for healthcare providers to make individual, team, and system changes. Then to the left, I have Kathleen Davis, who is a retired internal medicine physician and is also on the board of directors of the Worldwide Fistula Fund. The fund protects and restores the health and dignity of the world's most vulnerable women by preventing and treating devastating childbirth injuries. And finally, we have Susan Thompson, who's the director of the Timor-Leste programs for Health Alliance International. HI promotes policies and supports programs that strengthens government's primary health care and fosters social, economic, and health equity for all. So I'll start with one question for each of you to answer. And Heidi, we'll start with you. What are some of the challenges that are faced by birth attendants around the world, and what is PRONTO doing to solve these problems?
Thank goodness you gave us a chance to prepare
Yeah.
ahead of time. So thank you so much for being here. So next to, and I'm not even going to get up for it, but next to, I'm going to tell you a little bit about PRONTO. So PRONTO works with clinicians to give frontline providers the ability to practice maternal and neonatal emergencies, because in high resource settings like ours, clinicians regularly practice. I think, Jenny, probably you regularly practice how to manage complications. In low resource settings, it's very unlikely for people to practice. They don't have expensive simulation labs and mannequins and such. But even if they did, they wouldn't be able to use them most of the time. So in that bag is a simulation lab. So everything you need to run a postpartum hemorrhage and neonatal resuscitation is sitting in that bag. It's portable, you don't need electricity, and you can continue to practice how to manage these emergencies in your facility. So that's what PRONTO does, is gives people that power. And I want to point out Kimberly, my colleagues, Kimberly Calkins and Susan Glenn. So afterwards, if anyone has questions about the PRONTO pack or about our amazing curriculum, those two are the experts. So that's what PRONTO does, is try to give those providers not just the hard skills though, the soft skills too. So I want to talk a little bit about hard skills and soft skills in global health and some of the challenges that I think. In global health and in maternal health and medicine, Kathleen's actually a physician, I'm not, but there's a real emphasis on hard skills. We can measure them, we can check boxes, we can understand the effects of learning a hard skill. But often, even the word soft skills kind of has that's less important kind of a thing. And I don't think so, and the providers that we work with, certainly it doesn't show up that way. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a statistic here in the United States. The obstetrics and gynecological insurance industry here, the 30% of malpractice in obs-gyn in this country is caused by teamwork and communication errors in practitioner teams. So that's a soft skill that's making a difference. 56% of that 30% result in severe injuries, and 23% of that result in death. Right? So these are not small things, being able to communicate clearly with each other and work as a team, even though it sounds like, it's like a leadership retreat, or, it's not, right? This is genuinely serious stuff. So when we work on things, a lot of funders say, well, we want them to learn how to deal with a postpartum hemorrhage, not how to, talk to each other. And you're like, yeah, it's pretty important actually. So let us show you how we run curriculum and make sure that they learn these skills. So then one says to oneself, well, maternal mortality is high in the world, we're trying to reduce it. How do you scale? How do you scale soft skills as well as hard skills? So I'm proud that Pronto, through a lot of years of testing, has figured out how to scale a soft and hard skill learning approach through great curriculum and great tools. In Bihar, for example, in India, there's 99 million people, so let's just say it's almost a third of the United States in one state in India. Their maternal mortality rate is 165 per 100,000. Their neonatal mortality rate is 28 per 1,000. So to give you an example of the equivalent in the US, which is no great benchmark, but I'll do it anyway, is 26.4 per 100,000 in this country and 5.8 neonatal mortality, neonatal deaths per 1,000. So, and Bihar wants to get, well, India wants to get to 70 deaths per 100,000 for women and 12, can't remember, it's low, much lower than where they are, half. So they have a long way to go, and they have millions of people, millions of births. Well, Pronto over the last 5 years has trained 7,000 clinicians how to run SIM and has run SIM in over 500 facilities in that state. It means that all those clinicians are practicing the very thing that Jenny was talking about, managing those emergencies that show up in the night, the lights go out, your team isn't communicating clearly. And as a result, the deaths in those states are going down. In Mexico, for example, using Pronto from a randomized controlled trial, we found out that using Pronto reduced neonatal death by 44%, reduced cesarean section by 24%, and reduced preeclampsia rates by 68%. So this is really important work, and I'm thrilled to be able to do it and work with incredible midwives around the world. And I just want to put a pitch for soft skills alongside hard skills. But because I think women are often lowest paid, the least sort of appreciated, and they're the ones managing the patients on the front line. They're also having to manage themselves. So they don't just need to learn how to manage hemorrhage. They need to be given care and feeding as well, not just the mothers and the babies. Of course, we love that.
Thank you, Heidi. Same question to you, Kathleen.
Thank you. So, is that on?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So Worldwide Fistula Fund, which used to be One by One and is now merged successfully for a year with Worldwide Fistula Fund, works in 5 different countries in Africa. We work in Burkina Faso, Niger, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya. And as part of identifying and treating ladies with childbirth injuries, we have trained ladies who have been treated and restored, reintegrated into their societies to go out and be advocates in their communities. So they come and they say, I had this fistula. They tell briefly their fistula stories, all of which are horrible. And then they say, this doesn't have to happen to you. That we can, and then they teach about safe motherhood. So we have the 4 pillars of identifying ladies and then treating them with surgery, reintegrating them, and teaching them businesses so that they can have money, and teaching them to table bank, be in groups, and I'll tell you more in details about that. The barriers that we find, and it's kind of interesting, just as a segue to you and soft skills, is our first line barriers are distrust in our rural communities that are uneducated and mostly illiterate of going to using midwives and so on. Why is that? Because they feel that maybe somebody has been and they were disrespected, maybe because of all these pressures that the midwives feel, whatever, that they were disrespected and that they'll go there and be looked down on. So mistrust is number 1. They also feel that if they have a delivery, which most deliveries we have to realize are normal, in their hut, with their grandma or the traditional birth attendant, then they'll have this delivery which is normal, which is common. But if they go to a clinic, then they'll get a C-section. And they think that's true because the people who go to the clinic are the ones who are in desperate labor situations, and if they're lucky, they'll get a C-section, and if not, their outcome is much worse. So there's a circular thinking pattern there. And so our first thing is to dispel those myths and to encourage them to go and make a relationship with the midwives and the birth attendants. So we don't train them, but we do try and increase the referrals there so they can do their jobs. Secondly, financial. So the women in these communities frequently are not in power over what money gets spent on them. And there are some communities that really do not value women enough to say, yes, we'll get together and pay for the transportation when they're in trouble. And in all fairness, they may not recognize how bad the trouble is. And they may think that since most births are normal, that the ones that are not normal, the lady is in trouble, maybe she was running around, maybe she's cursed. They don't really have an anatomic explanation for that. So if the transportation is there and they can get to a clinic, as you've already heard, the resources may not be there. And there need to be resources not only at that clinic, which is the first line clinic, they're not going to do C-sections there. If the person needs a C-section or maybe transfusing blood is or isn't there, then they need to be referred on, and getting transportation for that is very difficult also. So what do we do? What do we do about that? As I said, after the ladies have been repaired, we have since 2011 a group of 28 ladies who have been repaired, who have had a lot of education in not only the anatomic situation with fistula and childbirth injuries, but also with safe motherhood. And they go out and they teach that. Until a few years ago, they taught it as they were looking for more fistula patients, and now they are much more trained, and they are going out and they have some solidarity groups that I'm going to talk about a little later to increase the amount of ladies we have doing this advocacy, all of them starting as shunned people in their communities. And lastly, we also are increasing capacity of referral centers that the midwives can refer to. So in Ethiopia, we have a fellowship for urogynecologic doctors, for GYNs, for nurses, for physical therapists. And in Uganda, we're partnering with others to have a whole full services maternity hospital that not only does fistula repair and childbirth injury repairs, but normal deliveries, outreach to teach the communities, and they're going to become a center of excellence for training for these kinds of resources that are so needed. In Uganda, that hospital is opening in August. So we are increasing the use of midwives by dispelling these myths and helping people prepare for pregnancy in advance. And then we're hoping to increase capacity so midwives can refer.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. Susan?
Same question.
Same question.
So there's a lot of challenges that face skilled birth attendants. I think Kirsten highlighted many of them in her opening introduction. I guess I'm going to kind of build upon what Heidi was talking about and echo what Heidi was saying. One of the observations that I've made in East Timor in the 17 plus years that I've been working there around maternal health is a lack of follow-up after training. So in Timor, the skilled birth attendants are largely and primarily midwives. The Ministry of Health, working with the UN collaborators, UNFPA, WHO, UNICEF, they've done a reasonably good job at carrying out these national level trainings for midwives in safe and clean delivery and essential newborn care, family planning, most recently in EMOC, emergency obstetric and newborn care. But there is rarely a follow-up after training plan. So these national trainings are large, intensive, expensive. Midwives from around the country come to the capital city of Dili, where they spend days or weeks. EMOC training is 26 days, and so they come down to Dili from around the rural parts of East Timor, and then after the training, they're sent back home. They go back to their home facilities in quite rural areas of Timor, and their home facilities, they may have a pretty low patient volume, where they just don't have that opportunity to practice these new skills that they've learned. But when a newborn needs to be resuscitated or a mom presents with postpartum hemorrhage, it's absolutely critical to the life of that woman and that newborn that that midwife is confident in her skills to respond. So when Health Alliance International, we identified this gap several years ago, and we call it the FUAT gap, which is the follow-up after training. We love our acronyms in global health. So we dove into that gap, and we worked with our Ministry of Health colleagues. We work with the National Institute of Health, which is responsible for all of the training of providers in teamwork. And we developed what we call learning labs. And learning labs, we have them now for safe and clean delivery, essential newborn care, antenatal care, and postpartum care. And what that looks like is our team of nurse midwife trainers, and alongside the National Institute trainers, we go out to where midwives work. So we don't expect them to come to us. We go out to them. We, for a 6-month cycle, for safe and clean delivery, let's say, we go out every month, 2 to 3 hours over a lunch hour, because we cannot take those midwives away from their responsibilities of delivering care. So we do it over a lunch hour for 2 to 3 hours. The trainers set up a skills station, simulation-based, and just provide that opportunity for midwives in that facilities to practice the skills that they've learned. It also organically has turned into an opportunity for colleagues to dialogue with one another, so they spontaneously will talk about difficult cases together, so there's learning that happens from that. That has been a really successful approach in East Timor. It's been scaled up nationally now, which we're really quite proud of. And then I do also want to talk about our new effort, because a year ago we were super excited to get a grant from the Australian government to introduce PRONTO International simulation model into Timor, which Marianne Mercer and I had wanted to do for many years, and so we got this grant to do this. So we have now kind of dove in, and as these things work sometimes, they don't always work this well. Right at the time, you write a grant, and you get that proposal out the door, you get an award about a year later, and when we got the award, East Timor was getting ready to roll out EMOC training, these 26-day trainings. So we got this perfect synergy, which happens so rarely in our work, and we now are going out to facilities. The PRONTO International team has come to Timor. We've trained 20 simulation facilitators who can run these sims, and if you've never seen a PRONTO sim, you really should go to their website and see them, because they're these highly realistic simulations where there's mother actors. It gets quite tense, and so we're running these simulations again where midwives work in their home facilities to help keep those skills that they just spent 26 days learning fresh, and so that they're confident to respond to those emergencies. So that's been really exciting.
Great for us too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Susan. So we've just heard from each of you the importance of the humanity of assisting women with birth, from whether it's women who have fistulas going out and talking about and educating other women, or Susan, the work that you were just talking about with midwives being mentors to other midwives. You know, birth is one of the most human-centered activities on earth. And in an age where there's an onslaught of apps and digital technology, and certainly we see this within global health, it's like kind of the sexy thing for many years now. Why is it important for the humans, the birth attendants, to be trained, and to be trained in a human-centered approach? And what are some of the challenges and solutions that PRONTO is seeing in applying this approach to birth attendant training?
I think that, so I think the human-centered piece is there's a human giving birth to another human through their body, right? Like there's not an app that's gonna fix that. So, and there's not gonna be an epidemic of perfect birth any day soon. So, you know, what it really takes is, and there's often in the medical community the mother-baby dyad. I believe it's the mother-baby-provider triad. I believe each person in that, and it could even be as many people in the team, but I think of the triad as all the providers that are there. They need as much help and care in order to be centered enough to help and care for the mothers. And that means that you have to meet them where they are. You have to not ask them to come to Dili for a training in a hotel room where you're mimicking a perfect situation and then send them home to their facility only to manage a postpartum hemorrhage at night in the dark. So we have to understand where people are, and there are some really excellent technologies that have come about to help with maternal complications and newborn complications. The non-pneumatic anti-shock garment, for example, for postpartum hemorrhage, or there are apps on phones where you can look up algorithms if you're in trouble. The trouble is, or not the trouble, we have to remember that technology has to be deployed by humans and deployed at the right time and in the right way. And so this idea that, these pie charts, like the bar graph doesn't capture the anguish and the joy of my experience, it also doesn't capture all the complexities that midwives face or birth attendants face when they're managing these things. And so it's, how do we help them integrate good technologies that work for them? How do we listen to them about the technologies that don't work for them? How do we get them involved in the technology before they're developed? How do we ask them their opinion and try things out and get them connected to what it's really about? So I feel like that's really, Pronto really tries to do that with our curriculum adaptations, with the way we deploy the packs, with the way the midwives have a chance to react and discover and learn. And then I also love what Susan said, that they get together and talk about cases. This idea that you're going to go to a skills lab and learn how to do shoulder dystocia or manipulate something in some way and get a box check. That's not unimportant. But sitting and saying, hey, I'm afraid to resuscitate a baby, and I know folks from Adara, Brooke from Adara, and her folks can speak to this too about newborns. Sometimes they've seen so many newborns die, and they have so little confidence in their own skills that they literally say, and I just heard my Indian country director say this to me yesterday, the midwives look at the baby and they say, I'm going to see if it breathes on its own, because if it does, then I'll help it. But if it doesn't, I won't be blamed by the family because I'm afraid of the family. They're scary to me, I'm scared. And they have reason to be scared. We've had midwives whose lives have been threatened by families whose patients have passed away. Now there's every kind of situation there. You could be mad at the provider, but really, it's just a terrifying situation across the board, right? She needs confidence, she needs understanding, the family needs education, the whole situation just needs a little bit of empathy and human-centered behavior rather than a pile of bar charts and graphs. So I am definitely an evangelist for the human spirit, not without bar graphs, but not instead of.
Great. Thank you. It all needs to work together, I think. Yeah. Kathleen, can you just give us a brief overview of what fistula is and some of the kind of cultural beliefs around fistula that really impact women? And tell us a little bit about the relationship between the quality of birth attendants and fistula.
Sure, I can do that. So first of all, starts with the uterus. So it was funny driving down, my husband dropped me off and said, well, where's my uterus? Where's my uterus? Oh, it's in the back seat. All right. So basically, there's, this is a gravid uterus, of course, and on this side, yeah, you can hold. I got it. Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So we have the bladder over here, and we have the rectum over here. And as the baby comes out, the pelvic bones, those ligaments that hold the three pieces together loosen up, and the baby has space to come out, and comes out, of course, the vagina. Now, if for some reason the labor is not going well, and that could be because the pelvis is too small for the head of the baby. That's the most common. Sometimes the uterus does not have enough strength to push right. But if the baby's head is not going to come out because maybe the child, it's an early marriage, or I should say an early pregnancy, marriage or not, and the pelvis isn't ready, it's too small. Or maybe the person has been malnourished since birth and isn't ever going to grow a big enough pelvis. And sometimes it's just the baby is big. So the head will be hitting on these tissues that separate the vagina, the uterus from these organs. And they will end up with necrotic tissue here if the baby's not coming out and the head keeps just trauma. So when the baby finally does come out, which sometimes can take days, then the baby is almost always stillborn, and this necrotic tissue over a few days will slough. And when it sloughs, there's a fistula, which is a hole in the body where there shouldn't be. And so that hole could be between the vagina and the bladder, which is most common, and then there's a hole in the bladder, which means continuous leaking. And sometimes also, or it's in the rectum, and then of course there's continuous, can't control the poo. So the ladies don't always know that it's related. Of course, in these communities, they don't know their anatomy. So the ladies don't really understand that necessarily that it's even connected to delivery because it starts a few days later. But they do know that they're continuously wet, they have no control over it, and they smell. And they are most often shunned by their families, by the whole community. Sometimes they're just in a little shack. Heidi and I were on a trip together, and there was literally the community, and she was married to the top person in the community who lived at the top of the hill, and she moved right down to a hut at the bottom of the hill near the river, right, Ernestine? And she was sort of thrown food sometimes her sons came in, helped her a little bit, and sometimes they die, they definitely can get infected, and sometimes it's years before they hear that there's any kind of treatment. So I think maybe our oldest one was 56 years. And then why then? And why then would she get treatment? And she said, well, I just want to die dry. So we go out, and so we have this cadre since 2011 of what we have developed to be regional representatives, and we have trained them in safe motherhood as well as all the anatomy of fistula and why it happens and so on. And they go out to their communities in Western Kenya, so they each have their own catchment area. And they will go to the weddings, to funerals, to churches, wherever, pull up their poster of the uterus and a smiling surgeon and a nice looking clinic and find ladies, and then they have to maybe convince the community leaders to let them go, or their husbands, even though their husbands have this other relationship or lack of relationship with them. So there's 28 of them who we have trained afterwards that wanted to be leaders. And when they go back, they can say, this is my fistula story, it happened to me, it doesn't have to happen to you. And now, in the last 3 years, we've had those, so we've, since I think 2011, we have treated about over 1,000 women. And then we now have the regional representatives trained in safe motherhood. It's a big 3-day training. Not as long as yours, but they don't do the techniques. This is training in how to refer and who to refer and prenatal care and so on. And they each now have a solidarity group of about 20 ladies who have also been repaired. So we have 200 women that are in 11 solidarity groups, and we're teaching them financial literacy and how to start little businesses and table banking, and so that they can start earning their own income. And we're doing this in Kenya, but we also have reintegration services in all our countries. So in addition, the Safe Motherhood Intense curriculum that we taught the regional representatives, they're now teaching those ladies in their solidarity groups. And most of the solidarity group ladies are illiterate, so they're not going to really be able to memorize 3 days of things. But we have flip charts that are all pictures. And we also, so what they've decided to do is they'll go out in groups of 4 to their communities, and each one will have part of the story. So the first one might be telling about the fistula, they'll each tell their fistula story, but the first one might talk about the importance of prenatal care. And I think that that helps break down barriers, because if they learn how to get to the midwife or the skilled birth attendant for prenatal care, not only will they have a healthier baby, but they will also maybe hopefully be able to get trust and dispel those myths about they're going to always have a C-section and that these people aren't trustworthy, because when they see them in a common clinic situation, they probably treat it well, right? And so then the next person might talk about the danger signs when they're in labor, and and also like swelling of the feet and severe anemia. Tell them how to see those kinds of things so that they can have healthier babies and not get in preeclampsia, as you well described, which is so frightening. And then have them have an attended birth. So we measure all these things. So now our representatives and their solidarity group in each of their communities are following each pregnancy with the government healthcare workers, so they can see, is it happening, and encourage it to happen for each pregnancy in their villages. And then additionally, once they come in, we have reintegration services in Uganda, where there's going to be that comprehensive hospital. They're making these. And in our solidarity groups, they're also having businesses, and I think they have goats and they have chickens and all kinds of agricultural things. My favorite one of the groups is buying plastic chairs. And I said, well, plastic chairs? And they said, well, yes, because then when there's a health fair, or there's a funeral, or there's a wedding, we rent them out. And I figured that's brilliant, because it's easier to take care of a plastic chair than a goat, at least for me. So anyway, that's what fistula is. And we also treat other consequences of childbirth injuries. So we have training in the Ethiopia place for physical therapy, for pelvic therapy, because there are childbirth injuries, fistula or not, where the nerves to the legs can be hurt, or the person can get a stroke with childbirth. And then, of course, with fistula, you need some pelvic training also. Yeah.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was a great overview of fistula and why it's so important, and the holistic work that you're doing to address it. Susan, so Timor is a little space in the world.
Little space in the world.
I almost said corner, but it's kind of not a corner.
It's not a corner.
That many of us don't know a lot about, but it's a fascinating and complex place. So can you tell us a little bit about working in Timor, and tell us what's unique about maternal health in that region?
Sure. I think there's a lot of things that are similar about maternal health in East Timor with some other countries in that region, Papua New Guinea, for example. But there are some things about East Timor that are quite unique. There are a few people in the audience that know quite a lot about East Timor. So when Hai first got involved in East Timor, it was 1999. The Timorese people had just voted for independence from Indonesia. Indonesia had illegally occupied the country for 24 years. The UN never recognized that occupation. During that 24 years, the Indonesian military carried out really horrific atrocities that are now well-documented human rights abuses. When that vote for independence happened in August 1999, there was about a 3-week period of time where the international community wasn't really paying a lot of attention, and the Indonesians, along, I will need to say, with militia, Timorese militia groups that did not support independence from Timor. And during that 3-week time, they had a really destructive departure plan where essentially it was a scorch the earth plan where they went around the country, and it's estimated that 70 to 75% of the infrastructure was wiped out, including health facilities. The electrical grid was pretty much wiped out. There was loss of life. There were a whole bunch of refugees that moved across the border to West Timor. So it was a really dire landscape with this brand new country that was emerging literally from ashes. You also had some pretty poor health statistics, so maternal health statistics. Maternal mortality at the time was about 600, estimated about 600 per 100,000 live births. 90% of women gave birth at home, only 19% of them with any skilled provider at all. The total fertility rate was 7.8. That was actually the highest in the world at the time. So on average, every single woman had 8 children. I met a lot of women who had 16, 14, 12 children. You also had a population who didn't have a culture of going to seek services at health facilities. As evidenced by some of those statistics, the health facilities during Indonesian times were staffed largely by Indonesian doctors. Also, mid-level managers were in the health system, also Indonesians. And there's a profound distrust, and justifiably so, of the Timorese against their Indonesian occupiers. And they simply just did not go for routine maternal health care. And then further complicating that landscape at the time of independence was all of those Indonesian doctors, all of those senior level managers, they left. And so you really had a decimated health system in terms of infrastructure, in terms of workforce. So when we got involved, there was a lot to do around maternal health. It was essentially a non-existent health system. What we knew we wanted to do is the way that Health Alliance works in all of our work. We wanted to support the Ministry of Health as they were essentially building a health system. We wanted to support that work and help them build a stronger system. We needed and wanted to support them to improve the quality of services that were delivered through the public health sector. We also realized quickly that we needed to work on the other side of that equation. So we needed to work in the communities to increase the awareness and the knowledge about the benefits of seeking care when you're pregnant, during delivery, at the postpartum period, the healthy timing and spacing of pregnancy. So there was a lot of work to do, and we really needed to work on both that supply side and the demand side. And that has framed much of our work there for the past 20 years. And speaking maybe specifically to that post-conflict setting that I think Timor is moving out of now, but certainly was present for most of the years that I've been working there. So post-conflict, but also a very traumatized population, and not unlike other post-conflict setting, domestic violence is a really significant problem in Timor. There are some good organizations doing some good work around it. We have taken that on board in that we've created a domestic violence module for our learning labs that I talked about earlier, so that when we're training midwives on safe and clean delivery, essential newborn care, when they interface with women, that they know what the signs are of possible domestic violence, that they know how to talk to women sensitively about it, because it's obviously a sensitive subject, and that they have some resources that women can access. And so that's framed some of our work, specific, I think, to the Timor context.
Great. Thank you, Susan. So Kristen mentioned at the beginning that that Global Washington is really looking at wicked problems, and clearly this is a wicked problem that we've barely scratched the surface of today. For those of you who are going to Women Deliver, we'll have a chance to go much more in depth with all of these, but just what all of you know of this work and what you've relayed to us today, I'd love to hear from you about whether or not you're optimistic for the future around the ability to have enough and trained skilled birth attendants to meet the needs of women around the world. And I just also would love it if you could just briefly tell us one of the things that you are specifically most optimistic about around this issue. So I threw a little curveball in there. Okay. So actually, why don't we start with you, Kathleen? Mix it up a little.
Well, I'm hopeful because not only our organization, but other organizations are working very hard to do this. I think that the big leap up has to be when we have a committed government, and with healthcare workers doing some of this work too. I think we need to have countries, have most gains in countries that really have stable governments. So I concern myself with something like Burkina Faso, which has developed a democracy, was sort of on the, thought of as sort of the stable little piece of, one of the stable little pieces in West Africa, and now the destructive forces that are in Mali that used to be in Libya are coming further south, and we've seen in the paper, for those of you who happen to follow Burkina Faso, that there are terrorist groups coming in there, and will they just stay, because all this depends on having a safe and stable place to really train and go for the long term. So I have concerns about that, but I do also have hopes. I think that there are organizations in addition to ours that are really working to improve capacity of the higher level specialists that are needed to save lives. That the fact that there is attention being put to the really incredible importance of midwives for most of the routine maternal care, and then having access to places to increase it. I'm excited that one of our solidarity groups is already going into schools to try and start education early, because I think the bottom line of all of this, beyond money, is education. Because if you understand the process, then you know more what to do about it, right from all the way from middle school up. So that's good. And then I think to the extent that we can really actually have successful partnerships is also something. So we're trying to think, we're working with actually another Global Washington group, Path from Poverty, to try and develop a mechanism where we can go to other nonprofits that have solidarity groups, or even to governments, and put in sort of our piece about fistula and about advocacy for safe motherhood. So that particular program is one that's focused on clean water, but there's solidarity groups of 1,000 women. So if we can train their representatives to train those 1,000, we just can really leverage these kinds of messages and partner with those kinds of things.
Great, thanks, Heidi.
Susan.
You want me to go? Okay, Susan.
Yeah, I find it's heartbreaking that the greatest risk to a woman's life is becoming pregnant. I mean, there's something just so wrong about that in many countries. It's also heartbreaking that we have the healthcare solutions to prevent and manage those complications that cause maternal mortality, and it's just not getting to the places where it's so desperately needed. So am I optimistic? I might have answered this differently at different stages of my career, but I am optimistic. I'll go on record as saying that I'm optimistic. Why am I optimistic? Part of the value of being in one country for a very long time, working around the same issue, is that I've been witness to change. I have seen the change in the health system that we've been working to strengthen for the past 20 years. I have seen healthcare workers and people in the Ministry of Health who are more confident in their skills, who have better skills, who are demanding to collaborate with the health development partners. I've also been witness to the data, and in Timor, I mentioned that 600 per 100,000 live births when we first started. That's about 2003 data. That is now 195. That data came out in 2015. Is it mission accomplished? Absolutely not. Is it still unacceptably high? Yes. But it's real progress in a period of time between 2003 and 2015, which is not a long kind of time in development years, I call it. And women who attend at least 4 antenatal care visits gone from 30% to 77%. Women who have a skilled attendant at delivery has gone from 19% to 57%. That total fertility rate of 7.8 now at 4.2. So that's change and progress. So why has that happened in Timor? There's probably so many reasons. Addressing maternal mortality or reducing maternal mortality is not a one solution issue. It has to be addressed from many different angles. Some of the things that I think have happened in Timor, the leaders of the new country decided that health was a human right, and they declared universal access to free health services for every Timorese resident. That's leadership. We should all be so lucky to live in the kind of country that has that kind of leadership. Another thing that happened really early on that I think has left an imprint on the country is that during the 1999 to 2002 period, the country was under the UN sort of caretakership. While the new leaders of the country were putting the pieces together, at the Ministry of Health, we had a really inspired leader, Dr. Ruide Arajo, who was building a new health system quite literally out of ashes. And Meanwhile, in all of those 13 districts, the rest of the country, you had international organizations running the health system. It wasn't a system. They were delivering services and not really coordinating with one another very much, certainly not coordinating with this new fledgling Ministry of Health very much. And in around 2002, Dr. Rui decided that he tried to coordinate with them, he tried to communicate with them. He's ready to launch the new Ministry of Health. The country became officially the newest nation in the world in May 2002. And those international organizations weren't so happy to talk to him and coordinate and communicate. And Dr. Rui told me, I had this wonderful opportunity to sit down with him in February when I was there, and he told me that health workers, this is really powerful to me, that he was talking to health workers at the time, and they said to him, what did we fight for all those years against the Indonesian occupation? What did we fight for if we're just swapping out one foreigner for another foreigner who's going to run our country for us? And why is it not Timorese that are delivering the services to Timorese people? And so Dr. Rui made a very bold move. He thanked all those international organizations for their service, and he asked them to leave. And I happened to come into the airport right at that time in 2002, and there was a lot of angry international staffers who are quite indignant about this decision. But I really feel like it did two things. The first thing it did was it created space for this new growing Ministry of Health to move into. It also set a reset button for health development partners that I think resonates today, that if you're going to come to Timor, this is donors, this is the UN agencies and international organizations, be ready to partner with us. Be ready to make our priorities be your priorities, and let's communicate and collaborate. And I think that frames Timor in a way that I don't think exists in other places. And yes, it's more possible because it is small. It's a half an island nation with 1.2 million. We do not have 17 million, 1.2 million people. So I think it's easier in that context, but I think early country-led leadership has made a huge difference and contributed to that.
That's great. And there's some great models there that I think other countries are definitely moving more into the country-led leadership model, which is fantastic. Heidi?
I wanted to hear Susan's answer before I did my answer. I think I am a realistic optimist. I mean, you have to be optimistic to do this work, I think, but there certainly are days where I really vacillate about it. So I'm gonna, I feel Susan and I have had conversations about sort of needing to fall in love again with systems, health systems and maintenance, because there's a lot in global health right now that's sort of silver bullet, magic bullet kind of behavior, which is not, great. I am a maintenance girl. Like, let's keep the roof, let's have a roof fund, rainy day roof fund, let's make sure the health workers are trained, let's figure out supply chain. Like, it's not super sexy in the innovation department, but it's what needs to happen. It's good old-fashioned public health, and I want donors to fall in love with that. And part of the issue is that it's not fast, it's not ever done. It's not always easy to measure exactly how everything that you do matches to a particular outcome. It's not siloed. It's all these things that we need to kind of keep working on. I'm optimistic that there's a lot of talk about that, and there are some changes that I think I see. And then I also see the other, which is a little less exciting to me, which is, I mean, some of the innovations are great, but I also think there's sort of a little bit of pressure on that behavior and pressure on all of us to create things like that. And where I just want the healthcare workers to have what they need so that they can do their jobs well, so that mothers and babies will survive. It feels really simple to me. I think on the flip side of the system piece, I will talk about some individuals that make me really optimistic. Kimberly told me a story of one of our mentors who, we really work hard to create a safe space for healthcare workers to learn. And that seems maybe like a simple thing, but it's really not. I think even for those of us who speak in front of each other, being safe to really learn amongst your colleagues is not always an easy thing to do. And one of our mentors, so respectful maternity care, which is a really important, you spoke about it, feeling afraid of maybe you won't be respected at the facility. That's actually a true thing. Like there are people midwives or nurses who slap patients, they hit them, they yell at them, all sorts of things like this. And again, before you vilify the clinician, there's a whole host of reasons for that. But there is a need for those clinicians to think about what's happening for them, to debrief that, to be able to ask themselves, is that how I want to behave in the future? Why do I do that? And we were having a hard time in this one session getting clinicians to sort of talk about it. And one of the mentors stood up and said, how many here have slapped a patient? And nobody said anything. And she said, I have. Mm-hmm. And everybody else then raised their hands, I have too. And in that moment was when that group figured out to make a change in their own behavior. So its systems also come from changing cultures. And by having safe places for clinicians to learn and be present as human beings, they're going to change the cultures of the facilities and the health systems in which they work. And that's what makes me optimistic.
Great, thank you to all of you. I think you touched on this, Heidi, but I think it's just inherent in doing this work that at the end of the day, we all kind of are optimists. Doesn't mean that we're optimists all day, every day, but that we kind of have it in us that things are actually getting better, even though it sometimes feels like a monumental task. So thank you for that.
Or we should get another job.
Or we should get and that is when people do get other jobs, they realize that they're not. So anyway, thank you to all of you. So we've got just a little bit of time left for the panelists to answer some of your questions. Are there any questions from the audience? Great. Go ahead, Redma's coming by with a microphone.
Oh, great. Thank you. Hi there, I'm Brooke with Adara Development, and we do a lot of work with newborn health in Uganda and also community development in Nepal. My question is for Susan. You mentioned the FUAT gap, and I totally appreciate that. And I'm just kind of curious if you feel like that has changed. Do you feel like other people understand that that is a challenge? Do you feel like governments are on board and also the funders?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So the donors are funding us to do this. The Ministry of Health completely supports it, acknowledges that it's a gap. The reality is they don't have the car, they don't have the money for the fuel, they don't have the money for the per diem. We go out and we stay a week with our counterparts at the National Institute of Health. We pay their per diem and their hotel accommodations to go out for a week to be in the district, to go around to these facilities to do that. The Ministry of Health doesn't have the budget for that, and the donors to date have been willing to support that. However, the donors seem to be indicating that they consider it more nationally scaled, box checked, when in actuality it's a continuous job. It doesn't stop. So there's no more volume in these low volume facilities than there used to be, and skills are going to decay over time. And so we need to kind of just continually cycle through and do that. My hope and aspiration for the future is that there would be sort of a continuing education requirement in order to practice for doctors, nurses, and midwives in the country. There currently is not even a licensure. So we have to get there first, that they have to take a test in order to get a license, in order to practice, and then we might be able to institute sort of a continuing education requirement in order to continue practicing, and then maybe governments might get on board. I don't know, but so I hope that answers your question.
Marianne? There's a microphone coming in a second. It's a small room, but we're recording. So.
Yeah, so this is a question for Kathleen.
Yeah.
So you're working in several countries on the whole fistula issue. I'm thinking about the treatment, the surgical repair of fistula. So the question is, who does that in the countries you work in? I mean, it's a surgical problem. Do you require fully qualified surgical specialists, or is there any movement at all for surgical technicians to be trained in doing the fistula repair?
So that's a very good question. In each country, it is natives of that country except for Niger, but I'll explain that. So So if somebody has a fistula and they come very quickly, then it's a very simple repair. And yes, there could be surgical technicians who could do that. More frequently, it's years. And there's been infections, there's been scarring, and it's complicated. So it isn't, and actually one of our metrics is if there's a hospital that's doing outreach and they find that over time, there's a shorter and shorter amount of time between the fistula and the person coming in, and then there are less and less of them, then it's presumed that we're doing a good job with our outreach and our education because there's less fistulas happening and people are coming in sooner because they've heard about it, whether it's radio ads or from the advocates or whatever. But most of it is complicated, and there are a number of surgeons who just sort of do it because there's nobody else around, and then that gets more scarring, and then the fistula surgeons have to do more complicated ones. So somewhere between 70 to 90% of the fistula surgeries are successful in the end, so the lady is not leaking. There's about 10% where they can't be repaired, and then there's everything in between. So in Burkina Faso, we have probably the only urogynecologist that was trained, that was the first graduate of the fellowship that we support in Ethiopia. So we see him as becoming a leader in the country for referrals and so on. And he also does the surgeries in Niger, because at the moment we don't have a fistula surgeon in Niger. In Uganda, there's an incredible champion, Alison Masu, who you know, because One by One was supporting her before, and so was Worldwide Fistula Fund, so we continue to do that. She's the one who's developing this big maternity hospital, and she has local fistula surgeons, I think mostly trained in Ethiopia at the big Hamlin flagship hospital for fistula. In Kenya, we have since 2011 or before, Dr. Babeya is in Eldoret, where the headquarters are for the Kenya staff, and he does all the surgeries we'll refer in. We pay for bus fare in and out because we know him, we trust him. He was trained at Hamlin, and he can do the complicated surgeries. All of these people can. And then in addition, on the board of Worldwide Fistula Fund, there are American fistula surgeons who go and help train and help do the surgeries with the people who are being trained. And those fistula surgeons who are in country, who are native to those countries, are also training new surgeons.
Thank you. Another question? Anne?
I'll expose my ignorance about this. I'm so interested in the third leg of this stool and the focus of your panel about birth attendants, particularly because I think that word spans such a wide array of skills and training, particularly because, tell me if I'm wrong, it would include village health workers, community health workers, traditional birth attendants who might have their position based on heredity or some perceived gift that they might have, all the way up through very skilled, trained, certified midwives. What I'm wondering is that if you feel in your experiences, which are extensive, if that interface between what's perceived as the modern, traditional, Western style training for modern, traditional, modern Western medical care has been made any progress in bringing in traditional birth attendants and bringing their skills in so that there's a more equality among, or maybe a standardization of skill levels and perhaps definition of what a birth attendant, what it means to be a real birth attendant.
That's such a great question. I feel like we could do an entire panel on traditional birth attendants as they relate to.
I was hoping that
but I bet, Heidi, you look like you're queued up to answer this one. I'm sure you can.
Yeah, it's such a good and important question. So every country has a really different picture in their minds about the more informal, and even midwives. There's even countries who are like, we don't want to even call them midwives, we don't want to give them a specialty, all that. But let's just go below, I mean, those are people who are trained, let's just go below that to the traditional birth attendants, skilled birth attendants in the community. One of the things that Pronto does really well, and it's exciting, is that we do interprofessional training, so doctors with nurses, doctors with midwives, so that's to break down hierarchies, which can actually be a real problem. India, for example, like really big problem. Nurses won't speak up when they see terrible things happening because the doctor's in charge. So that's that direction. This direction, so in Mozambique, we're just starting a project where we're designing, so the Mozambican government has very reluctantly decided that they want to change the name of traditional birth attendants to, what is it, birth agents, something like that. And they want to incentivize them to bring women in, not with money or any of that, but with trying to sort of shift what might be their role at the facility. And I don't think you're ever gonna find a government that's gonna say, yeah, let's equalize their training. That's not gonna happen. Like, they already are just, and they really need too much schooling and, you know, all this sort of stuff. That's not gonna happen. But what we're trying to do in Mozambique, for example, is have the clinical staff do simulation with the traditional birth attendants, and in that process, have the teams quite literally discover the best ways to work together, so that we can then write a report that the government can consider how they might want to shift the dynamic of the TBA facility universe. And I think having those teams work together to truly discover it. Because right now, there's in Nigeria, where Kimberly just was, they said, we don't even want to have do birth companions in the facility. We don't even want the mother-in-law or whomever, no birth companions. We don't want to practice that. We're like, that's something we're not going to cut out, by the way. That's just a kind of a given. But like, you think, okay, if we're trying to elevate this, how do we, instead of saying, no, we're going to add that, we're going to say, well, let's just run the sim and see what you think. That's the beauty of simulation. It feels real, but you also immediately begin to go, wow, maybe that birth companion could be really helpful. Suddenly the clinician's going, hey, hand me that, do this, what's that? And they're figuring it out in the actual process. And they begin to respect and see and find opportunities to work together that really belong to them. Which then can, I think, is more likely to be scaled than us going in and saying, well, here's the equalizer, no. So it's a culture change again.
Great, thanks, Susan.
I'll just add, it's a pretty different context in Timor, and Anne and George both know Timor pretty well. And you might be aware of this, so there are traditional birth attendants and women go to traditional birth attendants still, but it is not MOH policy to train traditional birth attendants. And we have advocated for a while, well, wouldn't it be a good idea if perhaps just the traditional birth attendant would accompany the woman to recognize that she's in labor, accompany her to a facility, and they're just pretty adamant that they don't want to get into training traditional birth attendants, and so because we really align with the Ministry of Health policy, we have never kind of entered that sphere, and I don't know anywhere in Timor where traditional birth attendants have received training since independence in 2002.
Yeah, and then I just saw this year in Tanzania a similar kind of cultural Ministry of Health, you know, kind of not wanting to train the traditional birth attendants, but then the reality is they're still attending births. And then realizing that they need to train those traditional birth attendants because it is impacting the birth outcomes, to kind of shun them and push them out of the system. And culturally, that's who's attending a lot of the births. So it's a really interesting dynamic, I think, and I think as everyone's kind of mentioned, it's different in different places of the world, but it's an issue, and it is a part of this wicked problem for sure. Like, how do you address that in a culturally relevant way? Yeah, great. I think we have time for about one more question. If there's somebody else who has a question.
I have one more.
Great.
I don't want to steal it. For Heidi, I am just curious, because you said that you meet the clinicians or this team where they are with what they have. What do you typically see, you know, where are they? And do you feel like, do you also, you know, advocate to the ministry or to different folks about what do we need to help them once they go back, or, you know, the next step forward? Just kind of curious about that.
I think this goes with the FUA part too. You know, we one of the things we advocate, we're working very hard on, is building a certification system for Pronto, not meaning just our curriculum, that if folks are trained in simulation and facilitation through the Pronto method, ours is the hardest out there. So if you can facilitate Pronto, you can do any of the other, I mean, Susan's seen it, you can do any of the other EMOC stuff pretty easily. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, to a country, we can help you train up a pool of master trainers and a pool of, say, and these are folks that would be embedded in already, it's already your job at the Ministry of Health is to be, maybe you're a county reproductive health coordinator. You add the simulation facilitation to your job already. You have a master trainer who can replace you with a new trained person if you leave your post. And all those people are certified so that because quality improvement requires quality assurance, right? Skills decay, not just for clinicians, but for teachers. So we feel that if we can create sort of a nationally based system, which we're doing in Kenya, then it can be self-rotating within the country and be pretty low cost and pretty functional for them. So that's one of the things we advocate. Another thing we do is, for example, in Kenya there isn't a midwifery specialty, right? So, and there's a belief in the Kenyan national government to rotate. Nurses need to know how to do everything, which I totally understand. There are a human resource shortage, right? But it's really tough when you spend a bunch of money in 26 days on an EMOC training, and next time you go back to that facility, that nurse is on orthopedics. Because then the cost of that training just disappeared with her. So, and then one says to oneself, so then should we really be mounting lots of trainings, or should we be building specialties? And allowing certain groups to stay in their specialties. It's a genuinely, I'm not saying it's the right answer or not, but it's an advocacy piece where we work with our academic partners to collect evidence on how these programs work, whether behaviors change if you keep people there, whether, how rotation works in terms of shifts. So it's that kind of human resource push, and also just continuous training push. So I think those are the things I can say about that. But yeah, we do a lot of work with ministries, and we really want to start from the top and understand the cadres in that country so that we're training the right groups that are most likely to stay or be able to re-up themselves if they have to depart.
Can I just make one comment? So in Timor, so we've introduced Pronto now, and I've been out to watch the Pronto simulations and the training. One place where the midwives were not at is they were not at communicating with one another. And so the teamwork and communication piece, which is completely separate from running the sim, right, different activities, is something over and over and over and over again the midwives and a couple doctors are telling us that they've never done in any training before. And I watched a simulation back in March of 2018 when these were our own midwives who we've trained, spent a lot of time training. Not one word happened in this simulation, including when the facilitator said her blood pressure happened to be 90/50. That didn't get communicated to the team, which is pretty important because it was a postpartum hemorrhage simulation. Nobody talked, and so the midwives who are now experiencing these activities in Pronto Sims, they say S-bar, so they're learning these communication tools, and they are really excited about that. I have to say, they're more excited about that than anything else.
I see Kimberly in the audience smiling. She works really hard on these activities to move the needle on that stuff. So I appreciate that, because a lot of people say, oh, teamwork, who cares? It really matters.
Well, thank you to all of you for a really kind of interesting and engaging discussion, and I hope that we'll keep finding platforms here in our own city to have these conversations because I think they're so important. And before you wrap, Kristen, I just have a little something for each of the panelists. A friend of mine who's actually in the audience started an organization called Women Hold the Key, and it's an amulet that is meant to identify women around the world who are all part of the same tribe of supporting other women. And it's really kind of been taking off, and so I've got a key for each of you as amazing supporters of women around the world. So thank you.
That was wonderful. Yeah, please join me. Thank you. I learned so much from all of you. That was fascinating. This is such an important topic. All of you came to learn as well. Some of you do this work day to day, and I want to thank you also for your hard work. So at Global Washington, again, we are here to raise the voices of people doing the work and those that are not here, like the birth attendants we've been talking about. A couple of things coming up that might be of interest to you all is first, the Washington Global Health Alliance is holding a debrief on the World Health Assembly in Geneva that just happened. The debrief is going to be on June 7th, so go to their website to register. And then Global Washington is hosting the president and CEO of UNICEF USA, Carol Stern, here on June 11th. She'll be talking about health issues, but also the vulnerable children that are part of this mass migration that we've had experienced all over the world. So please join us in more conversations. People often ask, okay, now what do? I have this knowledge, what should I do? I always say, find out more about one of these organizations in particular. Also, you can look in the issue brief. We list all the Global Washington members that work on a similar issue. Find out more, get involved, find your passion. Also, go tell someone else. And you always get bonus points for telling somebody outside of Washington State, the Midwest, good place. Go, tell someone about these issues that might not have a global mindset and start spreading the word. And just continue on your journey. So, thank you all for coming today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening in the sunshine. Thank you.
Thank you.